Tonight at 10, after 4 election defeats, Labour is told it won't regain power without a serious plan for government. Attending a party conference for the first time as leader, Sir Keir Starmer intended to set Labour on a path to power at Westminster. He set out new policies, he talked about his own background, and he underlined his ambition as leader.
In a few short years from now, I want to be here with you, talking about the difference we're making, the problems we're fixing as a Labour government.
We'll have the latest from Brighton, where the conference has been marked by divisions on the party's direction. Also tonight, Sarah Everard, who was raped and murdered in March this year, had been falsely arrested and kidnapped by a police officer. CCTV images show the moment Sarah was stopped by Wayne Couzens in South London. He will be sentenced tomorrow. Still plenty of long queues for fuel, but there are more signs that the crisis is gradually easing across the UK. And celebrating the life and achievement of Betty Campbell, the first black head teacher in Wales, with a statue in central Cardiff.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News channel, testing times in Turin as last season's Champions League winners Chelsea take on Italian giants Juventus.
Good evening. After 4 consecutive defeats since the general election of 2010, Labour was told today that it would never again ask for people's support without having a serious plan for government. That message was delivered by the party leader, Sir Keir Starmer, in a conference speech widely seen as a significant moment in Labour's quest to get back into government. Sir Keir set out new policies on education, housing and mental health, but he also talked about his own background and values. He told the conference in Brighton that the country faced a big moment that demanded leadership, and he dismissed the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, as a trickster and a trivial man. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, was listening to the speech.
A blast of fresh air? That's how Keir Starmer wants you to see him. Labour's week's been bumpy. And he had to show today that he really is in charge. Impatient for the chance.
I've waited 17 months, 25 days and 2 hours to appear in front of you in this hall as leader of our great party.
Choosing first to confront the party's crushing defeat at the election of the project he was part of too.
To those Labour voters who said their grandparents would turn in their graves, but they couldn't trust us with high office. To those who reluctantly chose the Tories, I say these simple but powerful words. We will never, under my leadership, go into an election with a manifesto that is not a serious plan for government. And there was a sort of horrible irony.
With his wife watching on, he explained how family has guided his beliefs.
My dad was a toolmaker in a factory who worked on the shop floor all his life. He gave me a deep respect for the dignity of work. And when I tell you that good work and fair growth will be the priority for a Labour government, I haven't learnt this in some political seminar. I learnt it around the kitchen table from my dad. That is why I am so proud to lead a party whose name is Labour.
But all week there has been noise here. Angst that Keir Starmer's abandoning Jeremy Corbyn's principles.
So
Heckles were hurled at him from the floor.
I have no regrets.
He had lines ready.
Shouting slogans or changing lives conference.
Then a new chant. He had the hall. He spoke for nearly 90 minutes, sustenance required, with plans for mental health, insulating homes, education, technology, and a real departure from the man who used to stand on that platform. Promises on crime, praise for the military, talk of creating wealth and national pride.
In this conference hall, we are patriots.
And while he didn't say his name, there was a tribute to Tony Blair.
Education is so important. I'm tempted to say it 3 times.
And
Hospital waits down.
what Labour did in power.
That's levelling up.
Power is his purpose now.
This is a big moment that demands leadership. Leadership founded on the principles that have informed my life. Work, care, equality, security. These are the tools of my trade, and with them, I will go to work. Thank you, conference.
He didn't mention Jeremy Corbyn by name. He didn't have to, because it's obvious in this hall in Brighton this week the power of the left has drained away, giving him a new sense of confidence in a changing party and a bolder voice that Labour has been desperate to hear.
It was a great speech. It showed that he cares about work and he cares about family.
Absolutely smashed it. I mean, this is the KEIR Starmer that we all know.
You wanted to hear more, you wanted bolder.
But that's what I was calling for, you know, that genuine alternative.
They were delighted. The vast majority of the crowd seemed pleased, relieved maybe. Doubts on the left, though, will linger.
I didn't think that was his moment. I thought it was quite uninspiring.
Keir Starmer leaves the stage, not his party's darling, nor its hero, but perhaps having proven himself a leader. Walking taller, with a conviction to win. The leader's team more than content tonight. But the party's problems remain profound, and he can't know if the country is ready to embrace him yet. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Brighton.
The Labour leader has acknowledged the scale of the challenge faced by the party to get back to office at Westminster for the first time since 2010. Winning many marginal seats, especially in the Midlands and the north of England, will be essential. Dudley North in the West Midlands, which turned Conservative in 2019, is one of those seats. And our political correspondent Alex Forsyth has been asking local voters for their response to Sir Keir's message.
Once the heart of industrial Britain, Dudley North was a Labour seat for years.
I always said that Labour was for the working class. I don't know about that now, but I still vote Labour anyway.
But plenty here have turned away from the party. This Brexit-backing town voted Tory last time round.
I've always been Labour, but we've turned to Conservative. Like Boris.
That's what the Labour leader's up against. What about Keir Starmer?
No.
Keir Starmer?
Know much about him?
No, I don't.
I believe in this country.
Keir Starmer did try to put his personality front and centre today as these students from Dudley College watched closely.
He was very articulate when he came on to him as a person. However, I'm still not as warm to him as I think I should be.
He was saying a lot of good things. I just need to know how he's going to push them through forward. I wanted to hear more about the mental health services. What about all the people that have been waiting on the waiting list for years?
He was blaming the Tories without actually having an action plan of his own. I found that quite hypocritical. And I would like to know how he's going to make these changes, how he's going to do all this.
I wanted, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to get it done. I think a lot of people are looking for that reassurance.
Yeah.
There is a lack of trust here in a community like many where people feel disconnected. That's exactly what Labour needs to overcome. But this local butcher isn't convinced Keir Starmer's yet speaking the right language.
I liked him at first, and I've become a little bit undecided.
What would you want to hear from them?
Common sense.
And the local barber?
All they can do is criticise everybody else. They get nowhere in life by just criticising and having no answer.
At the bookshop, though, there are higher expectations.
He's a good man. He's forthright. I think there's for a good, skillful, organised opposition party, I think there's a lot of opportunity here.
The local Labour Party has spoken to hundreds of people trying to work out why they turned away.
What do you make of what you're hearing from the National Labour Party at the moment? Are they saying the right things to win back places like Dudley?
Well, it's a work in progress, and I think what we've seen today and over the course of this week is some positives. What we've got to do is go out and regain the trust of the people that we wish to represent.
That is Labour's challenge, and it has to find a way back in places like this, if it's to find a way back to power. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Dudley.
Let's turn to the day's other main news now, because the mother of Sarah Everard has told the Old Bailey that she is tormented by the thought of what her daughter endured. Sarah was 33 when she was abducted in South London by a serving Metropolitan Police officer who falsely arrested her before raping and strangling her and setting fire to her body. Wayne Couzens, who will be sentenced tomorrow, was in court as Sarah's family described the depth of their pain and grief. Our special correspondent, Lucy Manning, has this report.
She was my precious little girl, said Sarah Everard's mother. I can never talk to her, never hold her again. I am tormented at the thought of what she endured. That was at the hands of Wayne Couzens in handcuffs when he was arrested at home, telling lie after lie. He'd already kidnapped, raped, murdered and burnt Sarah. He's asked if he knows her.
Do you know Sarah?
I don't know.
Okay. Do you know where Sarah is?
No.
Right.
Sat in handcuffs and well, I know her. So you must have something to say that I know her.
Within minutes, he's pretending he's handed Sarah over alive to an Eastern European gang.
They said, you've done good. They threatened to take my family away from me.
As Sarah walked from her friend's house, Couzens was hunting for a victim. This, the moment of that deception. His car on the pavement, hazard lights on, he stops Sarah. His arm outstretched, showing her his warrant card. Using his handcuffs, he arrests her. He'd previously been on COVID patrols, so knew what to say. Witnesses see Sarah with her arms behind her back, but they think it's an undercover police operation. It was kidnap. He used all the equipment and knowledge of being a police officer to do it. Couzens sat in the dock, never lifting his head. Sarah's family and friends listened to the devastating detail that is their daily reality. In the hours after kidnapping her, there was a mixture of the banal and the evil. After dumping Sarah's body in woods in Kent, he stops at Costa Coffee to get a hot chocolate. Police think he's raped and murdered Sarah by this time. The next day he goes to buy a green can and fills it up with petrol. He returns to the woods and burns Sarah's body in a fridge. Later, it's dumped in water. That same day, he calls the family vet as if nothing has happened.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could book my dog in for the vet so I can have a discussion about issues, please.
He goes back again to the woods for a family trip with his wife and children just days after he'd left Sarah's remains there. Sarah's family remained so dignified as they told the court about Sarah and about what they had lost. Her father and sister asked Couzens, who had his head bowed, to face them. Couzens started shaking. Mr. Everard told him Sarah was handcuffed and unable to defend herself. This preys on my mind all the time. I can never forgive you for taking Sarah away from us. All my family want is Sarah back. You have broken our hearts. Her mother Susan said, he treated my daughter as if she was nothing and disposed of her as if she was rubbish. In the evenings, at the time she was abducted, I let out a silent scream. Don't get in the car, Sarah. Don't believe him. Run. Her sister told Couzens, I hate to think of her so scared and alone. I hate that I wasn't there to save her, to stop you. I want to speak to her and hug her and hear her laugh. Couzens has still never explained what exactly happened that night. A police officer betraying his uniform, a family left with no answers and without Sarah, and a woman who had her life, her future taken.
And Lucy is with me now. And just after that report, Lucy, where you've outlined the horrifying detail of what happened, we talk about the police, the Metropolitan Police, and really what this case presents them with in terms of questions.
Well, the idea that a police officer can use his privileged position, his position of trust, to rape and murder someone is just the most chilling of circumstances, and it does raise questions. could he have been stopped should they have known about it? He was accused twice of indecent exposure, once in 2015 when he was in Kent working for the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, and again just 3 days before Sarah disappeared, he exposed himself in a takeaway restaurant. Was that investigation done properly? Were there delays? Do police take these sort of flashing incidents seriously? And has the trust of women now in the police been eroded somewhat? Will women be scared to trust a police officer if he stops her in the middle of the night? And I think for the leadership of the Metropolitan Police, when something this horrific happens on your watch, it's happened on Cressida Dick's watch, does the institution have to take some responsibility? Does she have to take some responsibility? She was in court today to listen to the family's very strong and emotional statements. And the Met said today it was sickened, angered and devastated by his crimes. Cousins will be sentenced tomorrow, and the prosecution is saying he should never be released because of his behaviour using his police background to kidnap and murder.
Lucy, many thanks once again. Lisa Manning, our special correspondent there. Let's turn to the latest on the fuel crisis. A reserve tanker fleet is now being deployed to boost fuel deliveries. They're being driven by civilians. But ministers say that soldiers will also be used in the coming days. And the fuel industry says that the situation at the pumps has started to improve and that it's working with the government to maintain regular deliveries. There are still long queues in many areas, but the number of petrol stations running dry has halved since the weekend. Our business editor, Simon Jack, has more details.
Upper Mill.
It's a question on millions of workers' minds. How many miles do I have left in the tank?
We've got 150 at the moment. That should see us through today.
Nurses Lindsay and Adele are heading out to see patients and can ill afford to stop to refuel.
I'm not going to be able to stop now because we've got to get to this patient as soon as possible.
And by the time they've seen their patients, it's too late.
We've managed to go past fuel stations that have queues, so we know they've got fuel, but we've been unable to get in the queue and wait because time is critical for us. By the time we've made our visits and made those patients comfortable, those fuel stations sadly have been empty.
The fuel industry and the government insist the situation is slowly improving, but the business secretary today said the army will be on our streets soon.
It takes a couple of days, sometimes a few days, to get troops on the ground. We've decided to do that, and I think in the next couple of days people will see some soldiers driving the tanker fleet.
Clearly there are still major problems about the availability of fuel, but what about prices? As you can see here, they've been rising steadily since the beginning of the year and are now at an 8-year high. The effect of this crisis comparatively small. The real reason they're rising is this. This is the global crude oil price. And the bad news is that this recent spike is yet to be reflected in pump prices. So they're expected to go even higher even after this current crisis ends. If you add that to this horror show, this is the wholesale gas price, which has bankrupted lots of energy companies, seen millions of people facing higher bills. And we have the makings of a proper cost of living crunch this winter. Economists are worried that mounting costs for businesses and consumers threaten to choke off an economic recovery, an unpleasant combination known as stagflation.
It's when you have stagnant or flat economic activity and accelerating prices. And it's bad news because businesses are having to raise their costs at the same time as households are actually unable to pay higher prices. So households are seeing their incomes squeezed. It's essentially the worst of both worlds.
Just this afternoon, 3 more energy companies went bust. Igloo, Enstroga and Symbio's combined 250,000 customers face higher bills from the new providers taking them on. The petrol crisis will inevitably end. The financial pressure on household incomes is arguably just starting. Simon Jack, BBC News.
The government insists it will not be introducing visa schemes for those sectors facing staff shortages following the interventions to help the haulage and food industries. The answer, according to ministers, is for companies to improve their pay and conditions instead. Retailers, including Next, have warned that deliveries at Christmas may well be slower unless the rules are eased. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson has the story.
Picking, packing and dispatching our online shopping.
These big warehouses now play a crucial role in the economy, and there are labour shortages here too. Tens of thousands of workers are already needed for full-time roles.
We have fewer workers than we used to have, and some of that is down to Brexit. So something like 15% of the HGV drivers that we had a couple of years ago were EU nationals, but the proportion for forklift truck drivers was more like 34%. If anything, warehousing has been harder hit than driving by the exodus of people from our workforce.
And now Christmas is coming. Next warned today that a lack of warehouse workers could impact deliveries. They and everyone else need an army of seasonal workers to meet demand, and pay is quickly going up.
We're seeing wages going up across the board. Nearly all of our customers we've spoken to and said if they want us to satisfy anything like their normal pre-Christmas demand, they will need to be paying more.
And this online juggernaut just upped the ante.
Here at Amazon, they're about to start recruiting for 20,000 people. And for the first time, in some areas where there's the biggest battle for workers, they'll be offering £1,000 signing on bonuses for these temps to make sure they get all their parcels out.
Experts reckon there will be even more parcels this Christmas than last, and that could come at a cost.
We're seeing carriers having to look at potentially adding surcharges in terms of delivery surcharges to consumers in order to pay for the staff that they need to have on their books for this Christmas to meet that peak demand.
More people are needed than ever before in this fast-growing part of logistics. The government says it won't introduce visa schemes for any other sector facing staff shortages. The pressure's now on to deliver Christmas, and this time workers can choose which company they want to go to. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
So the latest on the pandemic, and the UK's latest figures show that there were 36,722 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. On average, 35,204 new cases were reported per day in the past week. 150 deaths were reported in the latest 24-hour period. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. On average in the past week, then, 129 deaths were announced every day. As for vaccinations, 89.8% of people aged 16 or over in the UK have had their first jab, while 82.5% are now double vaccinated. The legal battle by Britney Spears to end her father's guardianship is getting underway in Los Angeles. The pop star, who's 39, has been seeking to dismiss her father from the role and accused him of abusing his position. Our correspondent Sophie Long is outside the court with the latest.
Well, Huw, that hearing is now underway just over 3 months after we had that emotional testimony from Britney Spears, ending years of speculation about what the star herself felt about the lack of control she had over her own life. She told the court she found her father intimidating and she found the conservatorship abusive. Well, there have been major developments in the case since then. Britney Spears was granted the right to hire her own lawyer, and both sides have applied to the court to have the current arrangement terminated. Now, the hearing itself is likely to focus on Jamie Spears and his management and involvement with the star's $60 million fortune. Now, in terms of the ruling, there are several possible outcomes. The judge could decide to have Jamie Spears removed and replaced as conservator. She could decide to have the conservatorship ended completely, or she could deny both petitions and the current situation would continue largely unchanged. This will have an enormous impact on the life of the star herself, but could have further reaching implications. People campaigning to have the conservatorship system overhauled are watching this very carefully.
Sophie, many thanks for the latest outside the court there in Los Angeles. Now, in tonight's Champions League football, Chelsea, the holders, were in Italy to play Juventus, while Manchester United were trying to revive their fortunes at home against opponents from Spain. And Joe Wilson was watching.
Old Trafford, as ever, expects. History makes a club's reputation and the players. Now those faces, many of them famous, needed reassurance that this was their United. To Turin, immaculate.
I told her that I wanted to be a teacher, and she said,
oh, get the idea out of your head.
To kind of just trying to support the community, whether it was kind of, I don't know, some additional resources or some additional funding, she absolutely went away and did it.
Incredibly, this is the first and only monument of a real-life woman in Wales. For centuries, public spaces have been reserved for figures of white men.
It's redressing the wrongs of the past, but it's also telling a new story, which is the story of a multicultural Britain, multicultural Wales, and a long history of Wales that has been kind of not suppressed, but kind of forgotten.
Betty Campbell's statue is the first of 5 female figures being raised around Wales. Signs of a slow but monumental change. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Cardiff.
And that's it. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.